The stars were gone. Behind her, the familiar constellations had blurred into nothingness, leaving only cold, distant flickers that offered no guidance. Wild Rose pushed the throttle, but the ship hummed with a hollow, rhythmic vibration that suggested she was further from home than she had ever dared to calculate. The void here was absolute. It pressed against the hull, silent and heavy, a vast darkness that swallowed sound and light alike. She checked the navigation array, but the screen flickered, struggling to find a reference point in the uncharted expanse. Then, the sensor alarm cut through the stillness. A massive, jagged silhouette blocked the starfield ahead. It was not a planet, nor a moon, but a city-sized construct of metal and light, drifting like a ghost in the hyperspace wake. It loomed larger with every second, a sprawling, artificial monolith suspended in the nothingness. Rose leaned forward, her hands hovering over the control console. The station pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow, casting long, shifting shadows across her flight deck. She adjusted the pitch, brought the stabilizers online, and turned her ship toward the docking bay. The isolation of the last light year vanished, replaced by the immediate magnetic pull of the unknown. The hangar doors slid open with a screech of protesting metal. Rose guided her ship into the bay, maneuvering between hulking freighters that dripped coolant and living ships whose hulls pulsed with a sickly, slow rhythm. Every docking port was occupied. She finally found a sliver of space, killed the engines, and the silence that followed felt heavy. She climbed down the ladder and stepped onto the grating. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and burnt ozone. Around her, the station floor was a blur of movement, yet nobody was actually running. A group of multi-limbed traders shuffled past, their movements sluggish, eyes fixed on the floor. A pilot slumped against a crate, ignoring the screeching alarms from his own vessel. There was no joy here, only the mechanical grind of 1,000 weary travelers moving, because they had to, not because they wanted to be anywhere else. Rose walked down the main thoroughfare, her boots clanging sharply against the deck, a stark contrast to the shuffling silence of the crowd. She watched a crystalline entity stumble, drop its cargo, and simply lean against a wall, too tired to even reach for the spill. The station hummed with a low, bone-deep fatigue that seemed to drain the very air of its potential. Rose left the main thoroughfare and pushed into the service levels, where the lights flickered in dying intervals. Dust coated the bulkheads. She turned a corner into a dead-end corridor and stopped. A heavy, reinforced door stood ahead, barred by thick, rusted iron beams. A faded sign hung crookedly from a single hinge, Nebula's Rest. She peered through the grime-streaked glass. Inside, overturned tables and shattered glassware lay frozen in a layer of gray soot. It was a tomb, but the architecture beneath the decay spoke of a time when this place had a pulse. She tracked the owner to a storage locker nearby. Gralthok sat hunched over a pile of scrap, his skin thick and leathery. When she approached, he didn't look up, only waved a clawed hand to dismiss her. Rose didn't back away. She leaned against the doorframe, waited for his rhythmic breathing to steady, and began to speak. She pointed toward the main hangar, then back at his boarded-up tavern. She spoke of the empty eyes of the travelers outside. Gralthok grunted, turned, and stared at her. He stood, moved to a heavy chain hanging from his belt, and unhooked a rusted magnetic key. He pressed it into her palm, the metal cold and biting. He gestured once toward the tavern, then turned his back. Rose gripped the key, walked back to the barricaded door, and tore the first board away. Rose started with the barricades. She pried the iron beams loose, the screech of metal echoing down the silent corridor. Inside, she swept away layers of gray soot that had settled for decades. She hauled out broken table legs, shattered glass, and discarded machinery, piling it all in the hall. The work was relentless. She spent hours scrubbing the walls until the original metal panels emerged from beneath the grime. When a support beam groaned and tilted during the ceiling repair, she had to wedge a hydraulic jack against the floor to hold the structure steady while she welded the joints. She replaced the flickering bulbs with warm spectrum filaments salvaged from her own ship. She sanded the warped tabletops until they were smooth to the touch, and polished the bar until the surface reflected the new, amber-toned light. By the time she finished, the space was unrecognizable. She painted the walls a soft, deep hue and installed custom ventilation that circulated the scent of solar cider throughout the room. She stood at the entrance, wiped grease from her forehead, and looked back at the work. The pub no longer felt like a tomb. It glowed with a steady, inviting light that spilled out into the hallway, cutting through the cold artificial shadows of the station. Rose slid the main bulkhead open. The first to enter were a pair of insectoid pilots, their wings clicking against the doorframe as they navigated the threshold. They were followed by a group of crystalline scholars who hummed in resonant tones as they surveyed the polished bar. Within an hour, the room was a hive of activity. The air grew thick, with the scent of solar cider and the low-frequency chatter of a dozen different species. Rose moved behind the counter, sliding drinks across the smooth surface, her hands busy and her eyes scanning the crowd. The skepticism of the station's residents vanished as they sat on the comfortable benches, the warm light softening the harsh edges of their weary faces. But the atmosphere shifted when the heavy iron door slid open again. Two individuals from rival clans stepped inside. They stopped near the center of the room, the crowd's noise dropping to a murmur. One rested a hand on a holstered weapon, his posture rigid. The other countered with a sharp, calculated glare. Rose wiped the counter, her movement slow, her gaze locked on the tension radiating from the two figures. The success of the night hung in the balance, threatened by the cold, unspoken friction between them. The silence in the room became a physical weight. The rival figures stood 10 paces apart, their eyes fixed on each other with a cold intensity that ignored the surrounding crowd. One reached behind his back, his fingers hooking around the grip of a serrated blade. The metallic scrape of the weapon, leaving its holster cut through the air like a jagged blade itself. Across the floor, the second figure reacted instantly. He slammed his hand against a concealed sidearm, the safety latch clicking open with a sharp, echoing snap. Patrons scrambled backward, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks as they pressed themselves against the far walls. The crystalline scholars retreated behind the heavy support pillars, their humming tones turning into frantic, high-pitched vibrations. Rose stood motionless behind the bar, her knuckles white as she gripped the wood. The air crackled with the static of imminent discharge. Every patron held their breath, waiting for the first strike that would shatter the tables, the glass, and the peace she had worked so desperately to cultivate. The tension hit a breaking point as the two warriors stepped forward, their muscles coiled for the kill, and the entire tavern stood poised on the razor edge of total destruction. The warrior with the blade lunged. Before the metal could bite, a shadow moved across the bar. Rose vaulted, boots hitting the polished wood, with a heavy thud that echoed off the metal ceiling. She didn't reach for a weapon. She stood tall, arms spread wide, planting herself directly between the two killers. The blade stopped inches from her chest. The second warrior froze, his hand hovering over his sidearm, eyes wide with genuine confusion. Rose didn't blink. She turned her head slowly, looking from one face to the other, her breathing measured and calm. She stomped a boot against the bar, the sound sharp and demanding. "Enough," she barked, the word cutting through the static of the room. "If you want to end this, you tell me why you are standing on my floor. Tell me the story. Right now." The warrior with the blade lowered his arm, his shoulders sagging with the sudden loss of momentum. The second man stepped back, his hand falling away from his holster. The lethal intent vanished, replaced by a collective, stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound in the tavern was the steady, rhythmic hum of the ventilation fans. Rose held her ground, her gaze unyielding, forcing the two men to look at each other instead of their weapons. The first warrior opened his mouth to shout, but only a dry rasp emerged. He looked at the blade in his hand, then at his opponent, and frowned. He tried to recount the insult that started the war, but the details blurred. He stumbled over the names, the dates, the locations. The second man stepped forward, trying to assist, but he too stalled. They traded confused glances. The memory had simply evaporated. The heavy pressure of their long-standing hatred gave way to a strange, hollow realization. They had been fighting for nothing. A low murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. The warrior with the blade finally sheathed it with a metallic click that sounded like a final period. The second man nodded, his shoulders relaxing as he let out a long, shuddering breath. A single insectoid pilot at the front table let out a sharp, clicking whistle. Then another. Within seconds, the tavern erupted. The sound of glasses clinking and voices cheering rose to a roar that shook the very foundation of the station. Rose remained on the bar, watching as the two former enemies gripped each other's forearms in a begrudging, genuine truce. The pub was no longer just a place to drink. It was a space where the impossible happened, a sanctuary where the galaxy's darkest cycles were broken by the simple act of listening. The roar of the crowd settled into a comfortable, rhythmic hum. Rose hopped down from the bar, her boots ringing on the floor as she navigated the crowded tables. The smell of solar cider hung thick in the air, warm and familiar. She reached the counter, wiping the wood with a rag, satisfied. Then, the heavy entrance door creaked. The noise at the nearest tables dipped as a figure stepped into the light. A hooded stranger moved through the center of the room, ignoring the chatter, eyes fixed solely on Rose. He reached the counter, his hands hidden deep within his sleeves. Without a word, he slid a thin, metallic sheet across the polished surface. It caught the dim tavern light, revealing shifting constellations and a deep, swirling nebula pattern. Rose leaned in. She traced the edge of the map with her thumb, her eyes widening as she recognized the coordinates for the legendary Emerald Void. It was not just a chart, it was a challenge. She looked back at the room, at the pilots and merchants who had finally found a place to rest. Then she looked at the map again. Her pulse quickened. The satisfaction of the pub held her, but the promise of the unknown pulled at her, sharp and undeniable. She stood motionless, the map beneath her fingers, caught between the home she had built and the horizon that had never stopped calling her name. Rose pulled her hand away from the map and met the stranger's gaze. She did not need to speak. She reached under the counter, grabbed a blank slate, and scrawled 3 words with a steady hand. She turned the sign, hanging it firmly on the tavern door. Back soon. Probably. The room was loud, alive, and warm. But the pull of the stars was a physical weight in her chest. She walked through the crowd, nodding to a merchant, patting a crystalline scholar on the shoulder, and stepped out into the corridor. Her boots echoed against the metal plating as she moved toward the hangar bay. She climbed into her saucer, the familiar hum of the engine vibrating through the hall as she engaged the thrusters. The ship slid out of the dock, leaving the city-sized station behind. Through the viewport, she watched the station shrink into a flickering point of light, its heart finally beating with life. She had built a sanctuary for the lost, but her feet were made for the path ahead. With a sharp pull on the controls, she accelerated, the ship blurring into a streak of white. She sailed into the deep, silent unknown, leaving behind a legacy of hope that would outlast the stars themselves.
Well, I landed my saucer in a station far away, where 1,000 alien freighters came and went each day. The corridors were crowded with creatures strange and grand, and I wandered through the marketplace with wonder in my hand. I saw a dusty tavern with a sign near falling down. No music in the windows and no laughter all around. So I called the owner on the station's old relay, and I asked him if a red-haired girl could help him save the day. Oh, welcome to the Wild Rose Pub. Come pull a chair and stay. We'll raise a glass to distant stars and troubles far away. For the stories keep on sailing and the travelers never stop. There's always room for one more friend at the Wild Rose Pub. We scrubbed the floors and polished up the bottles on the shelf, hung lanterns by the doorway, and I built the bar myself. The pilots came for cider, and the traders came for stew, and before a week had passed, there was a lively, merry crew. There were jellyfish professors and mechanics made of steel, crystal folk and insect clans, all sharing drink and meal. Every table held a tale from some forgotten star, and every night brought strangers from a little farther far. Oh, welcome to the Wild Rose Pub. Come pull a chair and stay. We'll raise a glass to distant stars and troubles far away. For the stories keep on sailing and the travelers never stop. There's always room for one more friend at the Wild Rose Pub. Now one night, two old rivals came with anger in their eyes, generations full of grudges and 100 ancient lies. Well, they shouted and they argued, and the room grew still and cold. So I stood upon the counter and I bid them both be told. They told their tales till closing time, and everyone could see neither side remembered how the quarrel came to be. Then laughter filled the tavern and the fighting all was done, and they toasted one another till the rising of the sun. Oh, welcome to the Wild Rose Pub. Come pull a chair and stay. We'll raise a glass to distant stars and troubles far away. For the stories keep on sailing and the travelers never stop. There's always room for one more friend at the Wild Rose Pub. Some came seeking honest work, and some came seeking hope. Some were stranded far from home and hanging by a rope. We found them jobs and passageways and friends to see them through, and the station slowly brightened as the years and friendships grew. Then a traveler cloaked in mystery arrived one rainy night with a map of hidden starways glowing green with ancient light. He laid it softly on the bar and said, "Adventure calls." And every soul fell silent in the tavern's crowded halls. Oh, welcome to the Wild Rose Pub. Come pull a chair and stay. We'll raise a glass to distant stars and troubles far away. For the stories keep on sailing and the travelers never stop. There's always room for one more friend at the Wild Rose Pub. Now, if you're ever drifting where the cosmic trade winds blow, and you're looking for good company, wherever you may go, you'll find a red-haired Irish girl beneath the lantern's glow, singing welcome to the travelers from 1,000 worlds below. Oh, welcome to the Wild Rose Pub. Come pull a chair and stay. We'll raise a glass to distant stars and troubles far away. For the stories keep on sailing and the travelers never stop. There's always room for one more friend at the Wild Rose Pub. Well, I landed my saucer in a station far away.